Alright, so this time we're going to look at instrument racks. This is the same analog device that I was using before for the analog demonstration. If I highlight that device and press Command and G, okay, let's just expand this device view chain list. Alright, so we've got an instrument rack with our analog device within it. Okay, so similarly to when you put more than one sample into a drum rack pad and it creates an instrument rack, a drum rack in Live 8, an instrument rack in Live 9, we've got a chain list. Okay, so this is to show and hide the chain list, this is to show and hide the macros, and this is the device show and hide. So we've got one analog here that I'm going to call analog 1. Okay, and I'm going to drag a different analog preset in. Let's just choose ensemble brass. Okay, so we've got our two chains, analog 1, analog 2. We've already seen this type of setup in the drum rack. Okay, so we've got volume, pan, chain activators and solos. We've also got the different zone editors, so key zone editor, velocity zone editor and chain select. So velocity zone editor is the same as we saw with the drum rack, and chain is the same. With the key zone editor we have more control, okay, because whereas with the drum rack, I'll tell you what, let's drop a drum rack in so we can demonstrate this. With a drum rack, if we have, bear with me a second while I find a couple of kicks. It doesn't matter what they sound like for now. I'll just drag that in here and then command drag that in there. So we've got, oh come on, stop being so slow. Once it sorts its life out, there we go. I'll drag that in there. Alright, so we've got our instrument rack with two kicks in. So this is our drum rack, remember. If we select this key zone editor, there's not an awful lot we can do with it. In fact, next to nothing, because by default, because this pad is assigned to C1, it's only C1 that's ever going to come into this into this instrument rack. Okay, well that's different when we deal with the instrument rack. So here we've got an instrument rack within a drum rack, but here it's just an instrument rack, so we do have control over which MIDI information comes into this instrument rack. If I record arm there and I'm using my Korg pad control, okay, so that's using my Korg pad control to trigger the notes. If I zoom in here, you should be able to see highlighted in blue which notes I'm triggering. Alright, so that's the notes that I'm triggering in real time, okay? So, what can we do with the key zone editor? Well, we can move these, what are these officially called by Ableton? We can move these zones around, these green zones. So, if I decide that I want from C1 to, say, F1, just to trigger that analog 1 device, the analog 1 chain, and we'll have, I'll tell you what, let's overlap it a little bit as well. So we've got C1 to, what was that, G1, and E1 to C2. So they're different zone mappings for different chains. So this top chain is going to respond to all notes between C1 and G1, and the second chain, ensemble brass, is going to respond to all notes between E1 and C2. So that's just chain 1, that's still just chain 1, that's chain 2 by itself, that's both. Let's just zoom in so you can see that a little bit clearer. Remember, this green top zone is assigned to chain 1, this green zone is assigned to chain 2. What about if we crossfade a little bit as well? Okay, so there's a C, that's just chain 1. There's the C above it, that's just chain 2. Alright, that's an F, and that's in between. So that's both chains, crossfaded between both chains. Okay, so we can map different zones based on which MIDI notes are incoming to different chains. Something else very interesting we can do with instrument racks is macro control. So if I just clear out this editing that we did before, so all notes are going to trigger all of the chains. Now if we go over to the macro controls here, we've got 8 different macro controls. And what are macro controls? Well, they're controls which we can assign parameters to. So if we go into map mode like so, okay, if we decide that we want this frequency cutoff, for example, to be mapped to macro 1, we simply select the frequency cutoff, okay? It's got those 4 brackets around it, and then we press map over here. Notice as well that the name of macro 1 is changed to filter 1 frequency, okay? So I'll tell you what, I'll come out of map mode to make it a little bit easier to see. As I turn this macro control, the filter frequency moves over here. Notice also that there's a little pink LED next to it to say that it's been assigned to macro 1. I can change the name of this if I want. I usually just change things to be called Jack, so let's just keep it as that. So we can map the frequency to macro 1. Let's have a listen. I'll play the clip. Alright, so that's a frequency cutoff, but it doesn't just have to be the frequency cutoff. We can map some other things as well. So we go into map mode, we can choose resonance, and we'll map the resonance to macro 1 as well. Alright, so now remember that this is just the frequency and resonance within ensemble brass. So what about if we want to also map the frequency and resonance on filter 1 within the original analog? Well, it's very easy to do. As well as going via the map mode, we can right click and we can map frequency to Jack and map resonance to Jack. Remember, Jack's the name of this first macro. Okay, so that's frequency and resonance of filter 1 on both devices on both chains. So that's pretty cool, but we can go further with it again. If we go into the map mode again, notice that as well as all this stuff going pink to indicate that you can map the various parameters to different macros, we also get this mapping browser. Now then, what have we got? We've got in the list the name of the macro that all the parameters assigned to, so that's the name is Jack. The path, that's the device, okay, so the one device is called analog 1, one device is called ensemble brass, and then the name of the parameter. Then we've got this thing called min and max. So this is the minimum and maximum value that we're prepared to move between, okay, with the macro. So we can move this parameter between these minimum and maximum values. So let's choose quite a small range. So this is the device is analog 1 and the parameter is filter 1 frequency cutoff, and we've said that we only want to move between a minimum of 1k and a maximum of 2.1k. Alright, so let's come out of map mode. It was analog 1, the device that we wanted to use. Let's hit the clip. So notice the resonance control is moving quite a way, but the filter frequency control isn't moving so far because we've changed the minimum and maximum values. So it won't go any lower than 1 and it won't go any higher than 2.1. Alright, so that gives you an extra layer of control. But we can go even further with it. So I'll tell you what, let's just clear out this for now. Alright, so we've changed that back to the maximum range that we can have. We can go even further with it in the sense that if I change this range of frequency filter 1 resonance, okay, sorry, not frequency filter 1 resonance, but just filter 1 resonance, well, we can invert this range, okay? So we can say that the minimum is 84 and the maximum is 12. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that when we move this macro, rather than going up and down, the same as the macro, the resonance control, it's going the opposite way. So it is going up and down, but it's going down when I turn the macro up, and it's going up when I turn the macro down. So let's have a listen to that. Let's just switch off this other chain so we can hear it better. Oops-a daisy. Okay, so we can map all of these different parameters to different macros. Okay, anything that's illuminated purple or green in Live 8, you can map to a different macro. All right, you can set the range of the mapping, so you can decide on a range that it moves between when you move the macro, and you can also decide to invert it quickly with a right click. Something else to be aware of is that you're not only limited to one device, so any device that's within that chain you can map to one particular macro. So I'll come out of map mode and I'll go to audio effects. Okay, I'll just delete this out of the search and I'll choose a reverb. So I'm going to hold command the same way that we would drop more than one sample into a drum rack pad. I'm going to hold command and I'm going to drag this reverb effect and I'm going to drag it on top of this chain. So now we've got a chain incorporating an analog device and a reverb device. If we go to this chain, there's no reverb device because we only dragged the reverb device onto this one chain. Now then, if we go into map mode, see that all the controls on the reverb device are also available to add to the macros. So we could add the dry wet control of the reverb to macro 1 as well. So as we alter this, okay, as we change the value of this macro, the dry wet amount is also changing on the reverb. Okay, so lots and lots of different things that you can do with macro controls.